said, we are very excited to welcome Tyrel Ventura to the show once again to talk a little bit about and break down the RFK endorsement of Donald Trump. RFK Jr., despite promising over and over and over again not to, has dropped out to endorse Donald Trump. Just, I mean, honestly, validating all of his kind of lib critics from the beginning, saying, oh, this is just a long-term play to help Donald Trump. He's going to whip up a bunch of, a quote unquote movement and then redirect it right into Donald Trump's campaign. And that is exactly what happened. We hate to see it. But we did want to welcome Tyrel Ventura to the show to give his thoughts.
What?
What's up, Tyrel?
Hey, everybody. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. What an interesting twist of politics yesterday and this week has been. How exciting. It's interesting when you bring it up because it's like you mentioned the Democrats, that was their big fear from day one, that RFK was this weird Trump plant or something like that, and his candidacy was set up just to like kind of siphon votes from the Democrats to help Donald win. And, as much as like his recent move, kind of makes all those, trust me when I say I know conspiracy theorists, makes those conspiracies kind of like seem accurate, and watching his speech and just knowing, a little bit about, him and his background. I don't think he was he was a plant from day one for Donald Trump, but, it's an interesting and tragic move that the man's made. It definitely, I watched his speech and he brought up like a lot of stuff we've been saying for years in terms of like how the two-party system is definitely rigged against third-party candidacies, how difficult it is to get on the ballots. I think he mentioned you need like an army of lawyers and you need millions upon millions of dollars just to get on the ballots in all the states as a third party. And he made a lot of he made some bad points, but he also made some good points about like the security state and the military industrial complex and a lot of things that, when you're watching his speech ring true for, his commentary. But then to join Donald Trump after like making all these really cogent points, like he could have made all the points he made and then said, I'm suspending my candidacy because I don't feel like I'm ever going to get a fair shot, walked off into the sunset. And he would have come out looking good. But instead, he kind of, jumping in then with the Republican Party, who, if there was another threat to them in some capacity, they would do the same things the Democrats did. This isn't to like say the Democrats were clean in their primaries or that they've handled this election, with true Democratic intentions. It's a really interesting, for him to kind of jump to Donald Trump and the Republicans then and say, I throw my support behind them in this kind of, makes reference to like a team of rivals kind of mentality that, if I'm lucky enough to get a position in Donald Trump's cabinet, I will vociferously, speak out against him in the areas we disagree with and things of that nature. But as we've learned from the previous Trump administration, anyone who does disagree with him in his cabinet gets 86. So it's kind of like, you wonder, Robert, if you paid attention to recent history, and looked at the last presidency of Donald Trump before you throw your support behind the man.
Also, maybe look at the polling and realize that, hey, you're about to debase yourself and a lot of your family lineage by getting behind this guy. I think it's hard to argue that you have any convictions at a political level when you start a race in the Democratic Party primary. You then say, it's impossible, it's rigged, I'm not working in the duopoly, I'm leading my movement elsewhere, we are going to do this independently. You fundraise, you have volunteers. Let's not forget the actual people who were inspired by this man's message. I might not have been one of them, right? But these are people that went out, knocked doors, handed out flyers, gave their time away for free, believing in the mission that he was espousing to them. And then he turns around and goes back to Donald Trump. So you've run the full circuit, right? I might not be as inclined to give the dude as fair of a shake as you might, Tyrel. So I want to pass this back to you. In your estimation, do you think this was all about expanding his political celebrity? Do you think deep down there was ever a sense of conviction? Because there was also reports that he tried to negotiate with Kamala Harris up until a few weeks ago.
It's interesting. I do believe that he had conviction for what he believed in and what he was trying to do, because I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at his life, I don't think he really needed this he already was selling books. He already was a political celebrity that, especially from his, pandemic stuff and like all of that. You know, he'd already kind of gained all that, so there really wasn't much for him to gain from mounting this in terms of more credibility or more celebrity or whatever it would be. So I can push back against that kind of mentality and looking at it, because I mean, he's a Kennedy. You know, he writes best-selling books. Like there's nothing more for him to gain beyond probably his conviction that he wanted to try to run and do this. And it's interesting because when you see him kind of doing that bit, and everyone's like, I've seen that before in a lot of like you generally don't necessarily see it in this instance of being an independent person with a large following or whatever, however many people are behind him. Like you mentioned, he did gain some pretty good support. I've seen that kind of political game played before, maybe not an independent run, but definitely in a primary run where, okay, hey, I have to pick between the two people who are, at the top of the Republican ticket. I'm losing. Who can I throw my support around? Who's going to give me the sweet deal? Right. So we've seen it more in primaries within the parties. Right. I don't think we've seen it very often. I mean, maybe way back. If you go further back in American election, your U.S. election history, you might see it with an independent. I haven't seen it in independent in my lifetime where they kind of like, well, we didn't see it with Jill Stein. We didn't see it with Ralph Nader. We didn't see it with a lot of people who were, had garnered.
Ross Perot never bent the knee.
Ross Perot didn't. But at the same time, Ross Perot was also all about Ross Perot. Right. So his convictions began and ended with Ross Perot, and as we learned through my father's experiences with him, with the Reform Party and the independents and all of that. Once the shine was moved over to Jesse, Ross wanted nothing to do with actually building the party beyond himself.
Very typical. Very, so issue I had with RFK's campaign is it never seemed like it was about building a larger, sustainable third-party movement, which clearly we need. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, I don't think that the Green Party is ever going to get its shit together. It's a series of diminishing returns every election cycle of my lifetime. They've done worse and worse and worse in the previous election cycle. So, if there ever is going to be a third party movement, we need actual leaders. And if someone like RFK had actually built a movement and, become maybe gotten close to the debate stage, he wasn't able to actually pull it off this time. But, at least you could start something. You could say, here's the beginning point of something, not just, hey, now I'm going to redirect all of my supporters and all of my, my email list, my donor list. I'm going to redirect that all into the highest paying bidder, essentially.
Yeah.
Which one's going to give me a better job? And it's funny too, because Donald Trump, RFK's whole thing is the vaccine and Operation Warp Speed and Dr. Fauci. That all happened under Donald Trump. Donald Trump was president during those critical months and years when the coronavirus hit this country, and it's his handling of the pandemic that RFK is so critical of. So what does this really come down to? At least from the average voter's perspective, it comes down to the fact that he feels like he was treated unfairly because he felt like he was entitled to being taken seriously in this presidential election, even though Joe Biden was the incumbent. Usually Democratic, the Democrats nor the Republicans really sanction a primary against their incumbent president. But he apparently felt, he was treated unfairly. And now because of that, is throwing all of his principles away, including the principle he has in regard to the vaccine, to get behind Donald Trump in hopes of getting a job that he probably won't even get. It's crazy.
Well, even I mean, if his stance on vaccines is obviously controversial and is obviously, there's a lot of holes in it. There's a lot of back and forth and all of that. I'm saying that lightly. I'm not, probably not giving that the weight it should. But really, what really strikes me about his sudden move to like, well, I'm going to support Trump. I'm suspending my campaign. I'm not dropping out, whatever the hell that means. But his move
healthy again,
right? Yeah, to his move to Donald Trump. What really breaks my heart about that is this is a guy who spent the bulk of his life before recent years, the bulk of his life, fighting for the environment and doing some incredible things in courtroom battles against people like Monsanto and giant corporations, things like that.
I feel like
it's like you're going to jump in with the Republican Party. They were the most anti-environment party possible. Mm-hmm. That's why it's like you can make great points about the shittiness of our electoral process or how awful it is to run either try to run within a party or try to run as independent. And you could have made half that speech that he gave. There's a lot of points you can look at and say, okay, yeah, I've said that before. You guys have said that before when talking about like the issues of third parties and the issues of spying and the issues of the war machine and things like that. You can nod your head and say, oh yeah, okay, I see his point there.
Totally.
But to betray all of that and then join with one of the two is where it really kind of is like, are you and here's the thing. My father's gotten a lot of hack recently and a lot of flack recently for essentially saying, hey, my heart and conscience says I want to support Walz and Harris in this election. My dad didn't do that because he's been promised a potential position in the cabinet. He didn't do it because, I get to go on TV. Again, it's like he can go on TV anytime he wants to.
Yeah.
He could have had a whole show on TV if he had just said the right thing about the war.
There you go. Yeah, MSNBC would have kept him on, and then he could have kept, so that's
outrageous.
That's where it's kind of like by immediately aligning himself with Donald Trump, it then kind of takes all the wind out of your sails of any points you want to make, even if they're true. Even when you're making a good point about our election process or how hard it is for third parties and how the system's so rigged against third parties or anybody outside of the Democrats and Republicans. But all that gets tossed out by like walking in and saying, okay, I'm going to join Donald Trump. It's a little, and here's a weird analogy, and it just hit me, so I could be totally wrong, and please correct me. It's a little like watching Vladimir Putin up until the invasion of Ukraine. Because up until the invasion of Ukraine, he was really good at trolling the United States for legitimate shit that we would do in foreign policy, where he'd kind of sit back and call it out or troll us on it and things like that. And then when he invaded Ukraine, he basically, essentially said, yeah, I am everything that you painted me to be. I am making this horrendously stupid fucking decision to invade Ukraine. That's kind of similar, and obviously not in loss of life, but in terms of just, it's very similar to what Robert Kennedy just did. It's like, okay, yeah, everything you accused me of, I'm now going to do, which then completely tears anything I said previous to this and totally blows that out of the water in terms of credibility.
And it just seems like he is doing it all for him, because if you look at his positions, and we've busted that guy's balls a lot, but he said things that obviously I agree with, right? Like he'll be like, I'm looking at a tweet from him right now that says the NRA is as responsible for the mass child murders as if they pulled the trigger. NRA has turned the Second Amendment into a suicide pact for our children. When do we deal with the NRA? That alone in a single tweet, totally agree with that. That's great political insight. That's, of course, something that every reasonable American believes. And now you're going to go work with Donald Trump, who has an A+ rating from the NRA, who has taken boatloads of cash from Second Amendment, just delusional, bloodthirsty monsters. And that's like one of the more marginal issues that we could be talking about. We could talk about how RFK actually, if you get him on the border issues, probably better than Kamala or Donald Trump. If you just said, hey, man, how do you feel about immigration in this country? He would probably give you a little bit of a story about like, immigrants built this country. The Kennedys have always supported, immigrant, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that line's very different from Kamala Harris being like, we got to stop the gangs and fentanyl coming across our border, right? We don't even have to talk about Donald Trump's rhetoric towards immigrants. So it's like, it's so... Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Like, I was never a big supporter of his politically, in terms of like you said, there's various things that RFK had said over the years. It's like, okay, yeah, that's true. It reminded me a little bit of like early Donald Trump in 2016 when he was wreaking havoc within the Republican primaries. He was saying stuff that was true when he looked out at the audience at the debate and said,
our country.
And then when he said he looked out at the audience at the debate and says, yeah, everybody here, it's not like average people. These are all donors cheering for us, and they're also over at the Democrat. There would be moments of like, oh yeah, he's right. But that doesn't, and to me, when RFK is sitting there talking about how we need to protect the Constitution and things like that, yes, have the Democrats in recent years been horrible when it comes to protecting certain amendments within the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? Absolutely, without a shred of, absolutely. Just so have the Republicans. They literally tried to suspend the Constitution just to keep Donald in office. To me, it's like, I don't know how you make that jump in your mind if you're RFK saying like, oh, I'm really pissed off at the Democrats and how they've treated, our Constitution in terms of freedom of speech and things like that. But Donald Trump's okay. You know, which is ridiculous to me because it's like Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about the Constitution. He will suspend it if it means that Donald Trump has something to gain in suspending it, you know, or stepping over it. I've always said this election, you know, when it was Biden and Trump especially, I've always said, and even today, this election is really about having to choose between the empire that we know and the petty dictator that we don't. You know, and that's really what it, you know, we know a little bit about Donald's record and seen where he wants to go with his time in office. So that's kind of the choices that we have in front of us. It's hard to choose. I mean, I put it like this to me, and I'm not endorsing or I'm not saying who I'm voting for, anything like this, but I know how to battle and politically fight the empire we know. I know what that fight's like. I don't know what that fight's like if Donald gets in and the Republicans enact, you know, like some of the shit we've read about with Project 2020, was it 2025 and things like that. I don't know what that looks like. It smells a lot closer to singular one man. I am God. You all worship me. I am your dictator.
You know, I mean,
I don't know what that fight's like. I would rather continue the fight that I know. I know how to fight the empire that is the United States. I know how to fight that big government. I know how to fight that shitty foreign policy. I've been fighting it. We all have. We know how to, you know, it's a hard fight. It's not easy, but at least I know that fight. I don't know what a Donald Trump second presidency looks like in terms of what his designs are for keeping office and never leaving office. And that's what scares me more than even what the Democrats are trying to pull. You know, at times.
Well, I thought Tim Walz had a great line at the convention the other night in regard to Project 2025, where he said, you know, I was a defensive coordinator. If you draw up a plan, you're going to use it. You're not going to waste time drawing up a 950-page document if you're not going to use it, especially with someone like Donald Trump, who, let's be honest, doesn't really have an ideology. That's why his only accomplishment was a giant tax cut, because that was already there, ready, pre-written, just like the frickin' Project 2025. So of course he's going to do that. He has no ambition of his own other than to stay in power and to increase his wealth while also increasing the amount of attention he's getting. So yeah, I think that of course they're going to use it. And when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. We all saw how Donald Trump reacted the last time when he lost, and it doesn't make you a frickin' MSNBC shit lib to point out that incredibly bold aberration from American democratic tradition is something worth being afraid of, something worth warning about and saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't let that guy get back in charge of the freaking country. Also, it's 100% correct, Tyrel, as far as the hypocrisies go. Like, one of RFK's big things is free speech and talking about that. But Donald Trump his biggest donor is Elon Musk. Look what Elon Musk has done with a platform like Twitter in the name of free speech. He's completely destroyed it and made it more censorious than ever. These are people that are co-opting and appropriating talking points that actually are important, like free speech. It's something we all believe in. Same with the anti-war thing, of course, only to abandon it when it comes to the issue.
Jail the flag burners.
Yeah, right. You know, I mean, so it's like it's easy for us to forget because I think if I remember correctly, it happened kind of early in his term. But Trump also dropped one of the biggest bombs that we have in our arsenal on Afghanistan, you know, early on in his term. And I remember covering it because I remember seeing all of the, you know, military industrial complex media types being like, you know, damn near, you know, having an orgasm on the air because they were so excited about us dropping a bomb on Afghanistan.
Wasn't that where they had the headline where it was like Trump's finally the commander?
Oh yeah, yeah. You remember that? Yeah, it was so you drop bombs, then you become presidential. That's the mentality in this country. And tragically, it you know, it still is the mentality amongst a lot of halls of power within Washington. That's still the mentality of who prove your presidency, invade a country, or drop a bomb on somebody, and then suddenly you're tough, because we have this weird obsession in this country with violent revenge. It permeates everything we do. Not to knock John Wick, but that's why we love John Wick. You know, but you know, it's a really, you know, it was really disheartening to see that. It didn't. I want to say, did it surprise me that RFK did what he did? I guess not. It was. I assumed he'd just stay in the race till the end. You know, I figured, oh, you know, the guy's got his name in enough ballots, he'll play it out to the end, and we'll see what happens. I've always said he's probably going to end up stealing more votes from Donald than the Democrats, because of some of the key issues he sits on. But yeah, it's just it's a tragic thing to see at the end of the day. Not tragic because, oh, I've lost faith in RFK. It's tragic because anytime you see damage to third party movements, even if you don't agree with them or you're not behind them politically, anytime you see third parties kind of fold the way he's doing it right now, or independent runs fold, that's always, it hurts the efforts then of future third party candidates moving forward, because now there's always that fear, oh, well, is this guy or gal running, or is this person running, are they gonna sell their soul for a cabinet position? Are they going to give up the movement? And look, we saw that to a certain degree with Bernie. He wasn't running as an independent. He was running in the primary, but then he threw all his love behind Hillary Clinton, and that did deflate the sales of that until he ran again 4 years later in 2020. So it always hurts when you kind of see people who claim to be independent and then boom, drop a bomb like this. We're just like, what are you thinking?
And I think it's like a little more excusable, at least in my opinion, if you actually get something out of it other than just like personal enrichment or attention or whatever it is. Like, for example, I don't know if you followed recently, but the Green Party, they selected their running mate. Jill Stein selected her vice presidential candidate, this guy Butch Ware or something like that. Yeah. But they passed on another candidate who was significantly more, I don't know if I would say impressive, but significantly more well-known. She was like a human rights attorney that had a pretty big following, a lot of clout. And this lady was offering to join the Stein ticket. But her strategy was, and they didn't agree to this, which is ultimately why she didn't become the nominee. Her strategy was that they would run this campaign where their main demand was for a ceasefire in Gaza and for a U.S. arms embargo to Israel. And that if they achieved that, if the Democrats actually did that policy, then in return, the Green Party ticket would drop out and endorse them, but only under that condition. I said, that's actually a decent idea, because if it actually works, then that's obviously a net benefit for humanity. Like that's an undeniable win that you just got. And obviously you're not going to win anyway, so might as well go for it, right? They decided not to for their own reasons, and I understand why, but I still defended that strategy. Why? Because it would actually be effective. It would actually potentially result in something were it to be effective. The most we can hope for now, or I guess the most RFK's fans can hope for, is that he gets a job, and like he's not going to get health and human services. There's no way he gets confirmed by the Senate. So even if he does get a job in the Trump administration, a theoretical Trump administration, it would be something pretty low level. He wouldn't actually have serious power over the freaking vaccines and stuff like that.
Well, then as he said in his speech, he's like, well, I would push back against and I would argue with it. It's like, well, then are you just going to become another person who resigns in protest? I mean, that's what, that's where that, or he would, or you'd be dismissed.
He got fired Steve Bannon within like 8 weeks of getting into the fucking White House. And that
it's a great point. That's where that's going. And that's what makes it so ridiculous. And to me, it's just kind of like, I'm like I said, I'm not shocked. It's more just I'm disappointed. I'm severely disappointed.
It's like a father, when their son, stole something. You're like, oh, I'm very disappointed in you, son.
I'm just disappointed that you do this. Come on, man. But then again, look, it's another example that I think also we have a lot of people running for office who are beyond the age that they should be running for office. 100%. RFK is a 70-year-old adult. And you get locked into certain mindsets and certain beliefs of like how you operate, especially in an intense political family like his. This feels like a move. If it was different characters involved, it would feel like a move that would make sense back in like the 1970s or 60s, like, oh, okay, this is kind of politics and this is the campaign trail. But in today's day and age with a candidate like Trump, it's just kind of like, oh God, that's so gross at the end of the day. Like, this guy does not care about the Constitution. The values that you espoused in your speech last night are kind of moot because you went with someone who is a pure threat. In terms of like, if you really wanted to make a difference, you would attach yourself to who you think is actually going to win the election. Right now, that all points to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So you would try to fight for that. If they're not picking up your call, you keep calling. You know, like, you know, you try to, you know, if that's where you're going with that. Yeah, it's one of those things, and it irks me because it's at the end of the day, you know, it's we're still faced with this really interesting challenge moving forward of building third parties and building independent movements. And as I've said before, this I feel is one of those moments that really sets that back. And it's going to have impact that way, because at the end of the day, I'm hoping Donald Trump doesn't win. I don't have any love for him or his candidacy. I think that it's just going to, you know, it's going to relegate what RFK was doing for his supporters, like you guys kind of mentioned at the top. It's going to relegate that support to kind of a joke of political history, you know, a one-off flair of a kooky candidate who stepped forward to try to say some things. And like I said, it's you know, I can give validity to parts of his speech, and that, yeah, they did a lot to censor the guy. They did a lot to kind of blacklist him from being treated like a legitimate candidate, despite his polling and favorability and things like that. And so if anything, if we want to learn from this, we should, you know, throw out the second half of that speech, look at the first half and say, okay, how can we make our electoral process fair to people who come forward that are better candidates than RFK Jr., that could potentially run into similar difficulties that he ran into?
Yeah, totally. Honestly, from the beginning, my advice to RFK was that he should have run in the Republican Party. Like, I get that your family was Democratic and all this stuff, but the Democrats already had their guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, Joe Biden was the incumbent nominee, and any challenge against him, whether it was Marianne Williamson, one that we supported, or RFK, it was never going to go anywhere. Dean Phillips, it was always just kind of a performative thing. And if he really wanted to have a competitive chance at whatever, he could have participated in the Republican primary. Clearly, the Republicans were, at least the voters were more sympathetic to his vaccine kind of rhetoric in the first place. It would have made more sense, and he wouldn't have felt so disenfranchised again by a party that already had a nominee. Then he acts like he was entitled to being taken seriously. It's like, bro, I'm sorry, but you weren't. Just because you were Kennedy. Like, if the people didn't, if you couldn't start a movement, then you couldn't start a movement.
And if you're not going to do it with the Kennedy name behind you, I feel like you should try it with a regular ass last name like Polston or Miller Broomfield. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just saying, hey man, if you thought you were cheated as a Kennedy, wait till you try it as a Joe Schmo off the street.
But now, yeah. Hey, you know, had he not done this, it does hurt your chances of having your backyard debate, because you know, had he not done this, he could have showed up to Gavin's honestly, backyard debate.
Gavin was pretty sure that the first lady was coming out. He was pretty sure, you know, it was going to be Anthony Blinken. We were going to really get to give that guy an earful, you know, over his decisions over the last 10 months. But
the People's Forum.
But
right.
Anyways, yeah. Did you have anything else, Gavin? Or I think that's about it for you. Really appreciate you coming on the show today, Tyrel. Always a wonderful time getting to gab with you a little bit. Much love to your family, your old man, all that jazz.
Yeah, no, thank you guys, and keep up the great work. Keep up the, you know, keep calling, you know, keep speaking your truths and speaking what you believe in. Everyone needs to do that. Everyone need, you know, and at the end of the day, you know, I kind of find it funny to see, you know, my father being criticized for what his decision was, but I can honestly assure people he's making it for his heart and conscience, which is what he's said from day one. Obviously, he still supports third parties. Obviously, he's still that guy who's fighting to destroy the duopoly of the two-party system. But at the end of the day, you know, I found it funny to see certain commentators being like, "What happened to the Jesse Ventura who says vote his heart and conscience?" Yeah, he is. Whether you agree with it or not, he is, and everybody should. And that's the most important thing as we move forward in this elections: is vote for who you truly believe in. Don't vote based on what, you know, party they belong to, or what you think is popular, or what's going to get you the most clicks. You know, vote and support who you truly believe in, and let us see, you know, and then you can always look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day.
Exactly. Oh yeah, dude. I think that your father's commentary on our current moment is going to age like fine wine. Absolutely. And of course, I mean, he's an unpredictable person. You can't always just assume he's going to have the same position every 4 years. That's not Governor Ventura. Of course, the guy's going to have an interesting, unexpected take every once in a while as the situation and context changes in front of all of us. We can't just always have the same. I mean, there's something to be said for having principles, but if you just always have the same position and never change and never adapt, whatsoever. That's not necessarily an attribute.
You
And
know,
obviously, we're all huge supporters of the third party movement, but it's just not materializing in this election.
What's really fascinating in an alternate universe kind of way is, though it was never really a serious ask, it was never something that really had any kind of legitimacy to it. You know, there was those rumblings of Jesse, you know, possibly being RFK's running mate, right? Like way back, I think it was last winter. Jesse hates Donald Trump with all of his might. Can you imagine if Jesse was still RFK's running mate, and what would have happened had RFK tried to do this?
Be a nightmare. Yeah.
You know,
Well, I think
you know, even my pop said that to me. Was like, man, thank God that wasn't anything that had real. Yeah, I'm glad that wasn't a real thing, because at the end of the day, man, it would have been that would have made for a very awkward fall.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you guys for having me on, man. That's always great to talk to you guys. Keep up the great work.
Cheers, Tyrel. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Ty. See you next time.